On the afternoon of December 5th, 1945, 14 United States Navy airmen climbed into 5 TBM Avenger torpedo bombers at Naval Air Station Fort Lauderdale, Florida. The mission was routine, a standard training exercise known as Navigation Problem Number 1. They would fly east over the Atlantic, drop practice bombs near the Bahamas, and return. Experienced crews, well-maintained aircraft, perfect flying weather at departure. They never came back. 2 hours into the flight, the flight leader, Lieutenant Charles Taylor, reported that his compass was behaving strangely. He believed his group was somewhere over the Florida Keys, but the land below didn't match. The other pilots disagreed. Radio communication deteriorated. The aircraft flew north, then east, then north again, searching for a coastline that never appeared. By nightfall, fuel was gone. All 5 aircraft went down somewhere over the Atlantic. A rescue aircraft, a PBM Mariner flying boat, was dispatched immediately. It also disappeared, along with its 13 crew members. There was, however, one detail that the legend consistently omits. A ship in the area reported seeing a sudden flash of light in the sky shortly after the Mariner's departure. Investigators later considered the possibility, though never confirmed it officially, that the aircraft suffered an in-flight explosion, possibly from a fuel vapor ignition, a known risk with that aircraft type. The Mariner may not have vanished into mystery. It may have simply exploded far from shore, over deep water, in the dark. 27 men. Not a single body recovered. Not a single piece of confirmed wreckage. Ever. What the Navy's investigation ultimately concluded was not supernatural. It identified navigation confusion resulting from a combination of factors, including a possible compass malfunction reported by Taylor himself, and errors of judgment by the flight leader. It's worth noting that Taylor had previously become disoriented on at least one earlier flight, a detail that the investigation acknowledged. The inquiry did not point to a single clear cause, and the loss of all 5 aircraft over open ocean at night, with deteriorating weather, left too little evidence to be definitive. But the investigation's conclusions were mundane in the truest sense. Human error, instrument uncertainty, worsening conditions, and the mathematics of a fuel-limited aircraft over an empty sea. The world did not hear that conclusion. It heard the silence where 27 men used to be. And into that silence, a legend was born. The term Bermuda Triangle was coined by writer Vincent Gaddis in a 1964 magazine article. But the legend truly exploded a decade later, when author Charles Berlitz published his 1974 bestseller of the same name, selling millions of copies worldwide and cementing the Triangle's reputation as a place of inexplicable, possibly supernatural disappearances. In 1975, researcher Lawrence David Kusha published a methodical rebuttal, The Bermuda Triangle Mystery, Solved, demonstrating that many of the Triangle's most famous cases involved distorted facts, ships that had actually sunk outside the region entirely, storms that weather records confirmed were present, but that popular accounts had quietly omitted, and incidents that had been invented or dramatically embellished. His conclusion was precise. The Bermuda Triangle's reputation was largely a product of selective storytelling. And yet, and this is the part that matters, the dismissal of the supernatural does not make this stretch of ocean safe. It does not explain everything, and it does not reduce the genuine measurable danger that this region poses to vessels and aircraft to this day. The Bermuda Triangle is not dangerous because of alien technology or interdimensional portals. It is dangerous because of something far more credible, and in many ways far more unsettling. A convergence of geographic, meteorological, oceanographic, and human factors that can turn an ordinary passage into a fatal one with remarkable speed. To understand why, you have to start with the ocean itself. The western North Atlantic is not a calm, predictable body of water. The region loosely described as the Bermuda Triangle encompasses the Straits of Florida, the Bahama Banks, the open Atlantic basin south of Bermuda, and the northern approaches to the Caribbean Sea. It covers approximately 500,000 square miles, and the seafloor beneath it is extraordinarily varied. In some areas, particularly over the Bahama Banks, the water is barely a few meters deep. In others, it drops to the Puerto Rico Trench, which reaches an approximate depth of 8,376 meters. That makes it the deepest point in the Atlantic Ocean, though it falls well short of the Mariana Trench in the Pacific, which holds the record for the deepest point on Earth. The distinction matters not just geographically, but practically. What happens to a ship or aircraft that goes down over the Puerto Rico Trench is largely what happens to anything dropped into an environment where recovery, by current technology, is effectively impossible. When a vessel sinks in shallow water, investigators arrive. Wreckage is photographed, documents are recovered, causes are established. When something goes down in 4 or 5 miles of open ocean, the absence of wreckage is not evidence of mystery. It is evidence of depth. But geography alone does not produce the danger. The ocean's behavior here is equally significant, and it begins with one of the most powerful continuous flows of water on the planet. Running through the heart of the Bermuda Triangle is the Gulf Stream. Originating in the Gulf of Mexico, it exits through the Straits of Florida between Miami and the Bahamas and drives northward along the American eastern seaboard before curving east toward Europe. At its core, near the Florida coast, the current can reach speeds of approximately 2.5 meters per second, though this varies considerably depending on the section and season. The important point is not the precise number, but the consequence. This is a current fast enough to move a floating object kilometers away from its original position within hours. For a vessel in distress, the Gulf Stream creates a specific and serious problem. A floating lifeboat, a fuel slick, a debris field. Anything that enters the current is carried rapidly away from where the vessel actually went down. Search and rescue teams must calculate drift when planning their search patterns. In poor visibility, in building seas, across 500,000 square miles, the Gulf Stream can effectively displace the physical evidence of a disaster before anyone reaches the scene. What appears to be a disappearance without explanation may be, in significant part, a disappearance by current. Then there is the weather, and here the triangle's geography becomes genuinely treacherous. The western North Atlantic sits in a climatological zone where atmospheric conditions can deteriorate with a speed that would surprise anyone accustomed to land-based weather patterns. The region is fully exposed to Atlantic hurricane season, which runs officially from June through November. But tropical storms have formed outside those months, and the more statistically common danger is actually smaller in scale and faster in development. Convective thunderstorm cells that can build from clear sky to violent squall within an hour, producing waterspouts, extreme turbulence, lightning, and seas that can transition from manageable to dangerous before a crew reaches the bridge. In December 1945, when Flight 19 was lost, weather records confirmed that conditions deteriorated significantly during the afternoon and evening. Sea states in some areas reached an estimated 15 feet. A search that might have recovered bodies or debris in calm daylight conditions found nothing in darkness, in building swells, in an ocean already disturbed by the Gulf Stream. The SS Marine Sulphur Queen offers a different and equally instructive lesson. In February 1963, this American tanker departed Beaumont, Texas, carrying approximately 15,260 tons of molten sulfur. She was last heard from in the vicinity of the Florida Straits on February 4th. A subsequent search located scattered debris, life jackets, a piece of name board, a foghorn, some cargo-related materials, but no survivors among her 39 crew members, and no substantial wreckage. The United States Coast Guard investigation identified multiple serious concerns about the vessel's structural condition and its cargo heating systems, concluding that a catastrophic structural failure or a fire and explosion related to the volatile cargo were probable contributing factors. The Marine Sulphur Queen was not lost to the supernatural. She was likely lost to a combination of a mechanically compromised vessel carrying dangerous cargo through waters where rapid weather change is possible, and extreme depth ensures almost nothing survives to be found. The case illustrates a pattern that repeats itself throughout the Triangle's verified history. The danger is rarely one thing. It is almost always several things arriving together. The disappearance of the British aircraft Star Tiger reinforces that pattern from the air. On January 30th, 1948, Star Tiger vanished on a flight from the Azores to Bermuda. The subsequent British inquiry found that the aircraft had been flying at low altitude to avoid headwinds, that its fuel reserves were limited, that it may have been off course, and that whatever ended the flight appears to have done so with no warning. No distress call beyond an initial routine position report. The inquiry concluded that the cause could not be determined, but explicitly stated that the loss was not inexplicable in principle. The physical mechanisms that could produce such an outcome, rapid mechanical failure, structural loss of control, a sudden catastrophic event, were understood. What was missing was evidence because the aircraft went into deep water and stayed there. There is one more layer of this ocean's behavior that deserves serious attention, though it requires careful qualification. The seafloor in and around the broader western Atlantic, including areas near the Blake Ridge Formation southeast of Cape Hatteras, adjacent to but not uniformly within the traditional triangle boundaries, contains significant deposits of methane hydrates. These are ice-like structures that trap methane gas beneath the seabed. The United States Geological Survey has confirmed the existence of these deposits in the region. Under specific conditions of temperature change or pressure reduction, hydrate deposits can destabilize and release methane upward through the water column. Researchers have proposed in theoretical modeling that a sufficiently large release could reduce the buoyancy of the water in the affected zone, potentially causing a vessel to founder very rapidly, with no time for a distress signal. This hypothesis has not been proven as the cause of any documented ship loss. It remains scientifically discussed, not scientifically established. But the seafloor geology of this region is a legitimate factor in understanding why the ocean here behaves in ways that can defy normal expectation, and why dismissing the triangle entirely as purely a myth misses something real about the physical environment. What is definitively documented is the navigational complexity of crossing this region in any era. The triangle occupies one of the world's busiest aviation and maritime corridors. Thousands of flights and hundreds of ships transit the area every month, and for much of the 20th century, navigators crossing this stretch of the Atlantic had to account for a phenomenon known as the agonic line, the line along which magnetic north and geographic north align, meaning a compass needle points to true north without requiring correction. Historically, this line passed through or near parts of the western Atlantic, and early navigators sometimes noted the anomaly. However, the agonic line moves over time as Earth's magnetic field shifts, and by the late 20th and early 21st century, it had migrated westward, away from the triangle's traditional boundaries. The navigational quirk that some accounts cited as a contributing factor to compass confusion is not a fixed feature of the region today. It is worth naming this clearly. The magnetic alignment argument, as historically stated, applies to earlier periods of navigation and should not be presented as a current ongoing hazard in exactly the same location. The USS Cyclops brings us to perhaps the most sobering and genuinely unresolved case in the Triangle's history. In March 1918, this United States Navy collier departed Barbados carrying a cargo of manganese ore, an exceptionally dense material, and a crew of approximately 306 people, according to most Navy records, though some accounts place the number slightly higher. She was bound for Baltimore. No distress signal was ever received. No wreckage was officially confirmed. She simply ceased to exist. The investigation that followed was constrained by the technology and documentation standards of 1918. Investigators considered structural failure under the stress of a heavy, dense cargo. They considered stability problems that might cause rapid capsizing. They noted that manganese ore, if it shifted in heavy seas, could alter a vessel's center of gravity with catastrophic speed. World War I was actively being fought in the Atlantic, and German submarine activity was documented in nearby waters. But no confirmed attack on the Cyclops was ever established, and no German naval records from that period were found to support it. The submarine hypothesis has never been dismissed entirely, but it has also never been substantiated. What investigators were left with was a large vessel, a dangerous cargo, a potentially compromised structure, an Atlantic march that can produce severe storms, and water thousands of meters deep. That combination does not require mystery. It requires only a catastrophic failure too fast to radio, in water too deep to recover. And this is where the psychology of the triangle becomes as important as the physics. The Bermuda Triangle sits across one of the most commercially vital and heavily trafficked corridors in the world. Miami to Bermuda, Florida to the Bahamas, the Caribbean shipping lanes. All of them pass through or near this region. The overwhelming majority of crossings are completed without incident. And this familiarity, this constant, unremarkable routine, creates exactly the cognitive environment in which genuine danger is systematically underestimated. When a flight from Miami to Bermuda has been completed 10,000 times without loss, the 11,000th departure feels routine. Schedules are maintained. Weather margins that might not be accepted on a less familiar route are accepted here. Small mechanical anomalies are noted and deferred. Fuel reserves that are technically adequate are not supplemented because they have always been adequate before. These are not reckless decisions made by incompetent people. They are predictable human responses to familiarity, what investigators and psychologists describe as normalization of risk. In maritime and aviation accident investigation, this pattern appears repeatedly. The most dangerous moment is often not the first encounter with a hazard, but the 100th encounter with a familiar one. Routine erodes vigilance, and in a region where storms can fully develop within an hour, where the Gulf Stream actively moves debris away from search areas, where depth removes wreckage from any realistic possibility of recovery, where a structural failure can sink a vessel before a distress call is completed. Routine is not a comfort. It is a specific and measurable vulnerability. The limits of rescue in this region compound everything. 500,000 square miles is not a search area. It is closer to an ocean. When a vessel disappears without a precise last known position, search teams must extrapolate from route plans, from last radio contacts, from drift calculations. The Gulf Stream is actively working against them. Water temperatures in the region, while warmer than the northern Atlantic, are still cool enough that survival time without proper protective equipment is measured in hours. And in the conditions most likely to produce an emergency, heavy weather, building seas, reduced visibility, helicopter rescue operations face their own serious constraints. The range of rescue helicopters, the difficulty of lowering a swimmer in extreme sea states, the near impossibility of spotting a small life raft in 10-foot swells, all of these factors mean that even a crew that survives the initial disaster may not survive the interval between the distress signal and the arrival of help. What the Bermuda Triangle ultimately reveals is something that applies to every genuinely dangerous stretch of ocean on Earth, but which is especially visible here precisely because of the region's fame. The distance between our perception of risk and the reality of it. Modern ships carry radar, GPS, satellite communications, AIS transponders, EPIRB emergency beacons, and weather routing software that would have seemed impossible to mariners a century ago. Modern commercial aviation is, statistically, among the safest forms of transportation ever devised. And yet the ocean remains categorically indifferent to all of it. The Gulf Stream moves the same way whether a distress beacon is active or not. A waterspout does not yield to a radar system. A structural failure in a compromised hull does not wait for a favorable weather window. And a crew that has made the Miami to Bermuda crossing 40 times without incident is not, on the 41st attempt, safer for the experience. In a precise psychological sense, they may be more vulnerable. This is the truth that the legend of the Bermuda Triangle accidentally obscures by framing the danger as supernatural, as something beyond rational explanation. The popular version of the triangle paradoxically makes it seem less threatening, not more. If the danger is random and cosmic, then it cannot be anticipated, and therefore no one can be blamed for failing to avoid it. The accidents become acts of fate. The scientific and maritime reality is more demanding. The Bermuda Triangle is dangerous in ways that are largely understood, partially predictable, and genuinely unforgiving of errors in judgment, mechanical reliability, or weather assessment. It is dangerous because the Gulf Stream erases evidence. It is dangerous because its storms build faster than its reputation suggests. It is dangerous because the seafloor drops to depths that place wreckage beyond any realistic recovery. It is dangerous because it is heavily trafficked and therefore normalized, and because normalization is the specific condition in which experienced people make the kinds of small compounding errors that maritime investigators read about afterward in silence. And it is dangerous in the way that all genuine maritime hazards are dangerous, not because any single element is uniquely lethal, but because several elements that are each individually manageable have a way of arriving together at the moment when the margin for error has already been spent. On December 5th, 1945, Lieutenant Charles Taylor led 14 men into an unremarkable afternoon over the western Atlantic. His compass was giving readings he didn't trust. His judgment, under pressure in deteriorating light over featureless water, led the formation in the wrong direction. The weather was building, the fuel was finite, and the ocean beneath him dropped to depths where nothing that fell into it would ever be found. 27 men left and did not return. The investigation offered explanations. The legend offered mystery. The ocean offered neither. It kept moving, warm, swift, and indifferent, carrying whatever fell into it northward and away, the way it has for 10,000 years, and the way it will long after every ship that crossed it this season is forgotten.